Spider-Man is the first notable superhero that was shown to struggle within a capitalist system. He was consistently shown in situations that his creators, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, thought would be relatable to a modern audience. So he's shown living in a crappy apartment, having to stitch together his suits on his own, struggle to hold down his job and pay rent. Spider-Man's already difficult life was made even more difficult due to his economic status, and this became a defining aspect of the character. Now, it's worth noting that half the creative team, Steve Ditko, was not even remotely a socialist. He actually specifically created a superhero inspired by Ayn Rand and objectivism called Mr. A.
Only fools will tell you that money is the root of all evil. Money is the tool of exchange.
Sorry. I just realized this is way better if it's read like a Ben Shapiro.
Only fools will tell you that money is the root of all evil. It's not. Money is the tool of exchange. A tool that must first be made before it can be used, begged, stolen, or earned. And it has to be made by the productive abilities of men, okay? Is that evil? No. Money is made by, and the rightful tool of, honest people. For people who can exchange their abilities for an equal value. Money. And that money is exchanged for an equal value in products and services provided by other men's abilities. Is that evil? No. Beggars and thieves and socialists exchange nothing for their wants and demands of other people's earned wealth, nor the cheats and corruptors who knowingly deal with the inferior, the illegal, and the non-value for our true value money. And that is evil. And that's what the liberals don't talk about.
Mr. A didn't really catch on, but he was one of the inspirations for Alan Moore's Rorschach, a character who was a loud, strong indictment of extreme right-wing ideologies held by people like Steve Ditko. When it comes to Stan Lee, I'm not sure where he landed on socialism, honestly, so I just can't speak much to that. But back to Spider-Man, who is absolutely not an objectivist hero. Virtually everybody knows the iconic phrase that is the core of Spider-Man's morality. With great power comes great responsibility. The idea that the more power you're gifted with, in whatever form, also gives you a greater responsibility to use that power to help the powerless. On the face of it, that's just basic superhero stuff, right? In a literal sense, yeah. All superheroes were created to be characters that help normal people who feel powerless in their normal lives. Superman's first story involves him doing things like protecting a woman from an abusive spouse, saving Lois Lane from a man who abducted her when she didn't want to date him, and taking a corrupt senator to task by forcing a confession out of him. But unlike Superman, Spider-Man is one of us. He can't prevent his own suffering at the hand of the larger power structures that dominate his life. Peter lives in a crappy apartment where landlords take advantage of him because he needs a place to live, because he has no money, because he works at a job that pays him too little, because his bosses are taking advantage of him because he's desperate for that money. That's what made Peter relatable in the 60s, and it's also what keeps him relatable now. So, fun fact about me, I like Spider-Man. I'm a big Spider-Man fan. Spider fan, even. Man. And so, as an excuse to talk about Spider-Man more, I'll be looking at all the live-action Spider-Man films through the lens of Marxism. What this means is that I'll be using Marxism as a framework to view these films, often with a focus on power structures, particularly the relationship between those with power and the people without power. Now, often this means power within a capitalist system because Karl Marx wasn't a fan, I'm not a fan, and that's one of the more dominant power structures that dominates people's lives. But a Marxist lens doesn't necessarily have to do with economics, so keep that in mind. I do want to make it clear, this isn't about intent, because I don't think the intent of Stan Lee, definitely not Steve Ditko, or any of the filmmakers was to make a Marxist hero or to make Marxist movies. But I do think the themes inherent to Spider-Man lend themselves very well to Marxist readings, and so it'd be a really fun way to look into these films, and that's what this is. This is having fun with Spider-Man with some Marxism thrown in. So if this sounds fun to you, let's have some fun, and if it doesn't sound fun to you, you can just leave, you can go. I'll be honest, I expected a bit more Marxism in this movie when I dug into it, but it's actually really not there much. There's some anti-corporate sentiment, but only so far as they're screwing over another rich guy who blatantly sucks.
The board expects your resignation in 30 days.
I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed?
And the big moment of Peter betraying Uncle Ben's ethos, and as a result indirectly getting Ben killed, is not stopping a guy from robbing the guy who just intentionally and maliciously stole wages from Peter.
$100. The ad said 3,000.
For 3 minutes, and you pinned him in 2.
I need that money.
I missed the part where that's my problem. You could have taken that guy apart. Now he's going to get away with my money.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
I just do not buy this as Peter making an awful mistake. It's only made awful by the fact that Uncle Ben dies, but I don't see any moral failing in not confronting the man with a gun to stop him from stealing another thief's ill-gotten gains. And the rest of the movie doesn't really explore many working class issues either, outside of showing JJ to be exploitative, so this movie's kind of a bust in terms of reading Marxism into it. Doesn't mean the movie's bad, mind you, it's just not a particularly class-conscious film. Well, okay, for the sake of argument, let's look at this scene.
Oh yeah, I got some for you, you mess with Spidey, you mess with New York! You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us!
One could make the argument that this is a display of class solidarity. People in the same general economic or social class banding together for the common goal of improving their collective circumstances. But then again, others, which is to say me, would argue that this is more of just a, hey, you don't mess with New York kind of thing. So yeah, I can't find any juicy socialism in this spider burger. So let's go to the next movie.
My head is falling on raindrops, and just like the guy who's raindrops falling on my head, falling on my head. Those raindrops are falling on my raindrops are falling on my raindrops are falling.
Now this is pod racing. This film's got it all. We got Peter living under a shitty landlord, we got Peter struggling to keep up with school and work and helping people, and we even got Peter attempting to make his own life easier by deciding not to help people, but eventually coming around to doing the right thing even if it doesn't enrich him personally, which, you know, that's kind of Marxist. And also this scene.
We won't tell nobody.
Hey, that's actual class solidarity. These people know that the powers that be wouldn't treat Peter fairly and therefore actively choose to keep their mouths shut as a form of solidarity. And hey, here's a take. Otto Octavius' arms. From a filmmaking and storytelling perspective, I've long felt the fact that his arms talk to him and make him do bad things was a huge cop-out character-wise. Not to mention a bit of repeating the first film's split personality gimmick, and I still feel that way. But if we're employing Marxist theory, I feel you can squeeze something compelling out of that. See, Octavius in this film isn't just an individual scientist, he's a cog in the science industry. Harry's gone full tech bro and jumped into investing, and all he's after in this film is money and, a little bit of revenge for his dad's death, but that's not relevant to this conversation. Meanwhile, Otto has his life ruined by his science experiment due to the pressure of needing to show off his potentially world-saving experiment to a bunch of suits. While the invention itself may exist for the common good, capitalistic interest compromises his work and turns it into a destructive disaster. Meanwhile, you have these arms speaking to Otto after his experiment fails. The voice of morality in Otto's head knows his project is done. It's hurt people and killed his wife, and he's ready to move on. The arms, however, tell him he has to try again.
We can rebuild, make it bigger and stronger than ever. But we need money.
Not to help people, but just for the sake of finishing it, and particularly because that's the only reason the arms even exist. The arms are a self-perpetuating product of capitalism that only care about keeping themselves alive and thus continuing past what would be in the public's best interest.
These things have turned you into something you're not.
And you could make an argument for that being a sort of allegory for the self-perpetuating nature of capitalism in general. They basically push him to ignore any form of oversight or regulation and push him to pursue his own genius whims at any and all costs.
The real crime would be not to finish what we started.
Because him being exceptional simply makes him the man who knows best. Basically, they're whispering Ayn Rand bullshit into his ear. The true villain of this movie is objectivism. Sorry, Steve. I say that, but I'm not actually sorry.
Mr. Sandman, bring me along. Make him the body that I've ever known. Give him two lips like lips. Then tell him that his lonesome lips are over, Sandman.
Alright, so it's probably not shocking to hear me say I don't think this movie's very good. It is fun to watch, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a movie that does the things it sets out to do. But that doesn't mean there's nothing to be gained from Marxist reading of it. Okay, so this film does something weird and retcons who killed Uncle Ben.
This is the man who killed your husband.
but it does so for a reason that's actually pretty compelling, especially when you're actively looking for messages pertaining to class struggle in the film. In this film, the man who killed Uncle Ben is revealed to be Flint Marko, aka Sandman, and the film lands in a very different place this time than the first film did. It portrays Uncle Ben's death as tragic, of course, and it makes clear that Marko is definitely at fault, but it also portrays him as a victim of circumstance, much like Peter was.
My daughter was dying. I needed money.
He was a man desperate to make money for his family and accidentally killed another man in his desperation. In this retconned version of Uncle Ben's death, it's made much more explicit that you could really argue that poverty and capitalism killed Uncle Ben. So, that's pretty interesting.
Give me rent. You'll get your rent when you fix this damn door!
This part is meant to show Peter going down the dark side and stuff, but
I'm really sorry, Mr. Dickovich. You know, all I got is this 20 for the rest of the week.
No. What else do we have? Oh, we have Eddie Brock, who is doing unscrupulous things in order to get ahead at the Daily Bugle, literally stealing Peter's labor in order to enrich himself. Eddie, that's not cool.
I like being bad.
And, I think that's it for this one. Okay, wait, actually, while I was editing, I thought up a new hot take, which is the symbiote suit that Peter uses. The suit changes his personality to display basically attributes of a successful person in capitalism, right? He's ruthless.
You were an embarrassment to him. Gonna cry?
He's selfish and self-serving.
If you want the shots, I'll take the staff job. Double the money.
He doesn't care about exploiting others.
Come smell.
He's basically the ideal example of a capitalist, someone who can exist and thrive in a capitalist system. And the movie shows this to be not necessarily a good person. So Peter ends up having to go back to being poor and unhappy. Because no matter what, he still has to exist in capitalism, and he can't thrive in capitalism while also being a good person. Ugh. Also, it makes him hit women. I'm not sure how to fit that part in.
No. What? You can leave a penny, you can't take a penny. What? No. What? You can leave a penny, you can't take a penny. What?
You can't afford your milk, just step aside.
What?
You can't afford your milk, just step aside.
What?
Okay, I gotta tell you something. I gotta tell you something. What? Okay, I gotta tell you something. I gotta tell you something. What? Okay,
You can leave a penny, you can't take a penny. What?
okay.
You can leave a penny, you can't take a penny. What?
You can't afford your milk, just step aside.
What?
You can't afford your milk, just step aside.
Okay, alright. All new Spider-Man, all new Uncle Ben, all new retelling of Spidey's origin. Something everyone always likes to see, right? How did they do it this time?
But your father lived by a philosophy that if you could do good things for other people, you had a moral obligation to do those things.
Okay, they kind of danced around the iconic quote. I guess I figured it was too cheesy or something. Doesn't matter. The sentiment is still there, and if anything, this phrasing is far more Marxist than the original quote. And maybe this time they did better with the origin from a Marxist perspective. Let's see.
You can leave a penny anytime. You have to spend $10 to take a penny. But Daddy didn't give you enough milk money today?
Definitely worse from a filmmaking perspective, but okay. So this guy is being petty about Peter not having a few cents he needs to buy milk. And then Peter doesn't protect this convenience store from being robbed. Okay, I mean, stealing from what is presumably a mom and pop place is definitely more morally suspect than stealing from the crooked wrestling guy. I'll give it that. And of course, the robber goes on to shoot Uncle Ben, which they made it way more his fault this time. He's not really heroic so much as he's really dumb in this moment. Like, why did you do that? Also, this is a complete aside, but 500 Days of Summer is such a stylistically bold movie, and somehow the same director's take on Spider-Man is so drab and boring from a filmmaking perspective. What's up with that? Is this one of those things where they hire a fresh new director and then just bully him into making the producer's movie instead of his own movie, or what? Like, I liked this movie when I first saw it, but in retrospect, I'm not sure why. I think I just wanted more Spider-Man movies. Anyway, pressure from huge corporations to do unethical testing is what ultimately pushes Connors to turn himself into a giant lizard, similar to Spider-Man 2 in that regard. so I don't need to like rehash that. Also, hey, this line has something to say about how corporate environments can be an inherently corrupting influence.
It's a little late for shock and indignation, Kurt. About 15 years late.
Connors has been complicit in a corrupt corporation for 15 years, and so him suddenly having a moral line when he knows this stuff has been happening is maybe hypocritical, and this guy's calling it out for his own gain, but it doesn't mean he's wrong. So yeah, that's fairly interesting. I will give this movie that. The crane scene has something going on, I guess.
It's the guy who saved my boy on the bridge. Hey, you still friends with Matthews, that crane operator down to 6th Avenue? Yeah. Get him on the phone for me.
Honestly, this feels pretty boring, and I just don't have a lot to say about it. It's a dull movie in nearly every respect. A fact about me and this movie is that I haven't watched it until a few weeks ago to script this video because, I don't know, ever since it came out, I just didn't want to watch it despite how big of a Spider-Man fan I am. Maybe even because of it. But chances are, a lot of you didn't watch it either because they made the MCU Spider-Man, so obviously that movie failed big time. So I'm going to talk about this movie. I'm going to actually synopsize the whole thing rather than expect you to have seen it. This movie is insane. This movie is stupid. And I actually kind of love it for that. It's really funny. So let's break this down and get into it. I am excited. Okay, so Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy break up at the beginning of the movie after breaking up and getting back together almost immediately at the end of the previous movie so that they can get back together before the third act of this movie so that Gwen dying can be more sad. She dies, by the way. But not before this scene happens.
Did this place that has Korean meatballs?
Yeah.
Have you been there?
Oh, I don't know.
It's mind-blowing.
Oh, that place on 6th, I know. You love it there.
How do you know that?
Hmm?
How do you know I love it there?
Because you told me.
I just opened last month. Have you been following me?
And then they call back to the stalking later.
I'm following you now. I'm just gonna follow you everywhere. I'm just gonna follow you the rest of my life.
It's not cute. Don't do... Anyway, moving on. That part just blows my fucking mind. Peter breaks up with Gwen because he sees the ghost of Gwen's dad in scenes like this.
Peter.
But I'm gonna catch up later. Thank you.
Amazing. Just wow. Meanwhile, a mentally ill man named Max, and I do mean like he's legitimately mentally ill, it's used to be villainous, which is not cool. Weird. Anyway, he works at Oscorp and he has a very intense parasocial relationship with Spider-Man that eventually becomes destructive when Max becomes an electricity man when he falls into a vat of eels, which that removes the gap in his teeth. And you know, this can actually be seen as an allegory for how the health insurance industry provides you things like dental care, but at a significant cost to... I'm joking. There's nothing here. It's just stupid. Okay, and this part's a little dark when you put any thought into it whatsoever, so brace for that. Electro has a scene where Spider-Man tries to de-escalate a situation involving a mentally ill black man who just needs help. But the cops instead choose to ignore what Spidey asks of them and shoot at Electro for simply moving too much, only serving to make the situation worse. So, from a Marxist perspective, you can argue that this scene has quite a bit to say, but I don't think the direct allegory to how Black Americans are treated was necessarily the intention. It works in that way, somewhat uncomfortably. I'm gonna go back to talking about how stupid this movie is now, but I feel like I needed to touch on that, so I'm not being like intellectually dishonest about it. Anyway, it turns out Peter's been best friends with an heir to a billionaire empire this entire time and just never brought it up, so that's fun. Harry Osborn inherits Oscorp from his father when Norman dies of a disease that literally turns him green and gives him demon hands. Oh, cool. Okay. So Harry spends the entire movie desperately looking for a cure to the disease because it's genetic, and apparently he's dying faster than his dad did for some reason. I don't know why. All the while, Oscorp's board of directors conspires to have Harry removed because he threatens their own power over the company. It's similar to Spider-Man 1's, just the rich fucking over other rich people. Which, you know what? Yeah, maybe you could make an argument that both this movie and Spider-Man 1 sort of made the argument that even for people who ostensibly benefit from the capitalist society that we live in can and will be screwed over by it as soon as they're considered bad for profits, and therefore everyone benefits from dismantling a capitalist system. So again, I'm trying to be intellectually honest about these movies, even the ones I don't think are good at all. After Harry's kicked out of his company, he goes to the Ravencroft Institute to free Electro from the clutches of a Nazi doctor doing experiments on him. I am not kidding. He is an actual Nazi doctor.
I'm Dr. Kafka. I'm here to help you.
This movie is fucking insane. Then Electro helps Harry access tech the company was keeping secret from him, which instantly makes him look even sillier than Raimi's Green Goblin. And Electro tries to murder Spider-Man with the power of music. I'm only half kidding. I kind of think it's so insane that it's kind of rad, actually. And then Harry shows up with an entire Green Goblin outfit, even though the movie's over now, because they just really wanted the iconic Green Goblin kills Gwen scene to happen, no matter how rushed it ended up being. And boy, is it rushed. And death is very unintentionally funny. And then Peter's sad, and he stops being Spider-Man for 10 minutes before deciding, you know what, we already did the Spider-Man No More thing in the second installment of the previous Spider-Man franchise, so I'll just go back to being Spider-Man again in time to end the movie on a fight with the Rhino. Okay, back to socialism. Firstly, of course, corporations. They are still the main oppressive force that Spider-Man faces, and they create all of his villains in this version of Spider-Man, so that's worth noting. They have weird super spy stuff happening with the Parkers that I neglected to bring up before because it's stupid and I hate it, but it's interesting because this inescapable evil force that they're fighting isn't a government entity, but Oscorp. Oscorp is a corporation that's so powerful they will send assassins after you if you threaten their corporate interests. And then there's this genuinely interesting detail that you don't see much in any films: the prison industrial complex. Ravencroft Institute holds Electro, but instead of working towards rehabilitation or attempting to help him become a non-electric human again, or bare minimum just holding him so he's not a threat to other people, they have a Nazi doctor doing experiments on him because they see potential profit in it. And that's a pretty harsh indictment of corporate-owned prisons. So that's actually pretty good. Honestly, this movie's hilarious. It's an absolute mess. It's inconceivably stupid at every turn, and I kinda love it for it. I'm kind of glad I watched this movie. It's not good, but I'm glad I saw it. And now we come to the MCU Spider-Man, and here's a little thing I didn't tell you before. The discussion around the MCU Spider-Man is why this video exists. Around the time that Far From Home came out, I saw #discourse on Twitter that discussed how the new Spider-Man was a class traitor, and the other Spider-Mans had all these great Marxist themes, and the new Spider-Man doesn't, and that's why it's a bad Spider-Man movie, which I wanted to interrogate. To be fair to everybody who disagrees with me on this, I am heavily biased towards these movies. I really like these movies. I think they're fun. I really enjoy Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I think it's a good time. I do think there are problems on multiple thematic levels, and I'll get into that, but I really like them, so my bias will be showing. Keep that in mind as I go into this. Let's talk about some Disney-owned, potentially socialist messaging. Sony-owned too, so not just Disney. It's two giant, horrible corporations that are absorbing and devouring our entire culture. So the big thing about this franchise is that Peter Parker now exists in a world that has been populated by other superheroes for a very long time. He's a young kid coming into his own, surrounded by heroes who are much more experienced than him that he's also looked up to for most of his life. And as a result, the dynamic has changed drastically from the previous two franchises where he was the only hero in existence. Now, before we dip into Spidey's MCU films, let's take a quick detour to his first introduction.
You got hard, kid. Where you from?
Queens?
We get our first look at this version of Peter Parker in Civil War. Tony Stark tracks him down, and we see that Peter has already had to deal with Uncle Ben dying and is already operating as Spider-Man. However, his operation is within the realms of what he could afford. He wears a sweatsuit, and his tech is cobbled together from whatever cheap junk he could find.
Thrift store? Salvation Army?
The garbage accident.
You're a dumpster diver.
Yeah, I was...
Peter Parker is poor from the word go this time, even when he lives with Aunt May, and it seems like this may have been the case even when Ben was around. Every piece of technology Peter has is extremely old. Both of the previous Peters have lived in pretty nice houses when they lived with Ben and May, so the contrast here is notable to me. They once again dodge the iconic quote,
Look, when you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
But you know, it's Peter talking, not Ben, so it's whatever. The main thing I can say about this introduction is that we get a clear portrayal of Peter's economic class here. This Peter is unambiguously poor, not middle class, just straight up in poverty.
I-O, let's go! I-O, let's go! I-O, let's go! I-O, let's go!
In Spider-Man Homecoming, they lean on Peter's economic status a bit more. This Peter has never been able to afford a plane trip.
Is it your first time on a private plane?
First time on any plane.
He finds the fact that he's in a nice hotel absolutely fascinating.
Okay, that's not my... What? I thought that was a closet. This is still my room.
No, please.
My room is way bigger than...
And I'd say half of that enthusiasm is economic and half of it is just him being a teenager. And of course, it's time to address the elephant in the room. Peter's relationship with Tony Stark.
That's not a hug, I'm just grabbing the door for you. We're not there yet.
Tony Stark just actively decides to take on a mentor role for Peter, starting with Civil War, which a lot of people take issue with, both from a character perspective and from a socialist perspective. I'll focus, however, on the one that's more relevant to this video. Yeah, Peter looks up to Tony Stark in this film. He lives in a world that absolutely worships Stark, and he uses his vast wealth to enact change of all kinds. However, storytelling-wise, Tony's portrayal is, I think, complicated.
I have to tell you, not a fan of that Tony Stark.
Tony was my best friend, and he was a mess.
In Civil War, despite being a secondary main character, Tony is portrayed as short-sighted and just straight up wrong. Other characters actually chide Tony about Peter's age.
Jesus, Tony, how old is this guy?
I don't know, I didn't carbon date him, he's on the young side.
And he's kind of a prick about Peter's economic situation.
You're a dumpster diver.
Yeah, I was...
You're in dire need of an upgrade. Systemic, top to bottom. I gotta know, what's your MO? What gets you out of that twin bed in the morning?
Here's a question. Why doesn't Tony just snap his fingers and fix Peter and May's financial struggles? Does it even occur to him to do so? Does he think about how life-changing it would be for him to give them an amount that would amount to a rounding error for him? I'd argue he doesn't even consider any of those things. It just doesn't cross his mind. Here's another thing. They call Peter's trip to Berlin in Civil War an internship.
I want to tell you what a incredible job your nephew did this weekend at the Stark internship retreat.
And it's true, from a certain point of view. Just like a normal unpaid internship, Tony stole Peter's labor and gave him almost nothing in return. All Peter got to keep was a fancy high-tech suit that Tony had no use for anyway, and later in the movie we learned that apparently came with strings attached, so he didn't even give him the suit, he loaned him the suit. And despite appointing himself as the mentor of a child who desperately needed a father figure after losing his old one, Tony's status as a famous billionaire pushes him to neglect Peter. Happy becomes Peter's handler, but Happy ignores Peter and gets annoyed when a young kid is understandably enthusiastic to impress someone he's likely looked up to his entire life. Like, even before he was a superhero, Tony was lauded as a genius super scientist, and Peter's obviously also something of a scientist himself. That one came right off the dome. I didn't script that one. And Tony refuses to see any fault in how he handles this.
Actually, it turns out it was the perfect sort of tough love moment that you needed, right? To urge you on, right? Wouldn't you think? Don't you think? Let's just say it once.
Now, this is clearly here for humor, but the implication of this exchange to me isn't that Tony is correct. The humor of the statement is that he blatantly isn't, and is claiming credit for something Peter did on his own for the sake of his own ego. Now, all this is to say that I can make a strong argument for the MCU Spider-Man films in particular, portraying Tony as a man out of touch with normal people. He is inconceivably wealthy, and that wealth inherently separates him from the experiences of other people who were born into less fortunate circumstances. And I feel like it's pretty hard to argue that this isn't true in real life. Money shields individuals from the realities other individuals have to face, and without a conscious effort to combat the distancing that comes with that, someone will inevitably lose touch with everyone else's reality. Tony, like many rich people, believes he is uniquely qualified to wield the vast amounts of wealth that he has and literally weaponizes.
You want my property? You can't have it. But I did you a big favor. I have successfully privatized world peace.
And I personally feel that Homecoming in particular intentionally portrays Tony as an incredibly flawed person despite his good intentions. Here's a good example. Peter does, and Tony delegates. Throughout the film, we consistently see Tony delegate tasks he doesn't want to deal with to people who are just not equipped to handle them. And Tony doesn't consider whether they're equipped to handle them. From his perspective, it's their job to, earn their pay by doing what he says. He delegates Peter's care to Happy, who is clearly overwhelmed by the work he already has and is tired of being treated like a manservant by Tony despite being Tony's closest friend.
Happy, can you give us a moment? You want me to leave the car? Why don't you grab Peter's case out of the trunk?
And it's also implied that Happy genuinely lives in fear of being fired by Tony if he screws up.
I really owe you one. I don't know what I would do without this job.
Which is particularly damning for Tony's character. He delegates dealing with Toombs to the FBI, who would have been completely unequipped to handle the Vulture suit. Then he blames Peter for getting involved, even though had he not been there, those FBI agents would have absolutely died and no arrests would have been made. Peter takes direct action because that's what he knows how to do. He's a kid who's had to do things himself his entire life.
I can take that up. You don't have to take it.
You gonna take it?
I can take that.
Thank you.
So of course, when there's a problem, his first instinct is to do something about it himself. Wow, that's a lot of words. And I haven't even talked about the Vulture yet. Here's something that's kind of obvious, but it's worth stating. All the problems in this movie and the next were created by Tony doing shitty things to people under him without considering the consequences. The Vulture is created because a bunch of working class construction guys suddenly have a salvage contract torn up by the government collaborating with Tony Stark. And they don't reimburse them for what they've lost. They just tear up the contract and say, go away.
I bought trucks for this job. I brought in a whole new crew. These guys have a family. I have a family. I could lose my house.
I'm sorry, sir. There's nothing I can do.
So now the assholes who made this mess are getting paid to clean it up.
Yeah, it's all rigged.
Yeah, it is rigged. This really isn't disputable. Tony has found a way to profit off of disaster here, at the expense of the working class. Damage control is introduced in the scene actually pretty villainously. They're portrayed as the assholes here.
Maybe next time don't overextend yourself.
He's right. I overextended myself.
Because, they are. And Toombs says a lot of things that are very true.
Selling weapons to criminals is wrong.
How do you think your buddy Stark paid for that tower?
Those people, Pete, those people up there, the rich and the powerful, they don't care about us. We build their roads and we fight all their wars and everything. They don't care about us. We have to pick up after them. We have to eat their table scraps.
And due to this, people argued that in defeating Vulture, Peter has defended a corrupt system and cut down a working class man, all to defend Tony Stark's stuff. And while I can see how someone could come to that conclusion, I think it ignores some pretty important things in the film. Firstly, Toombs is a class traitor. Here's the thing, Toombs isn't a good guy in any respect. It's stated that the weapons his team builds and sells on the street are a danger to normal civilians.
I don't want those weapons in this neighborhood. I got a nephew who live here.
It isn't about Tony Stark losing expensive things. It's about what Toombs and his team will do and build with those things, who they'll sell them to, and who those things will end up hurting as a result. Let's make another thing clear here. This is where Toombs lives. This dude is upper middle class. He doesn't sell these weapons to put food on his family's table. He sells them to maintain a comfortable lifestyle that he doesn't want to lose. This isn't a man driven to desperation. This is a man not wanting to give up his nice vintage car and huge house with a pool. So Toombs uses the language of class solidarity, and he's not entirely wrong, but even in the film itself, he's using that as a distraction. But here's the thing. Peter actually does internalize some of what Toombs says. Peter's seen firsthand. They don't care about him. Certainly not enough to effectively help out at ground level. Had Peter not been there to deal with what is relatively a more small-scale threat, a lot of people could have been hurt. So what does Peter do when offered the chance to finally be an official Avenger?
Thank you, Mr. Stark. But I'm good.
He turns it down. And why?
Somebody's gotta look out for the little guy, right?
The implication being that Tony and the other Avengers don't. Peter is shown at the beginning of the movie doing small, seemingly insignificant things to help people, things he feels aren't worth his time. And at the end of the film, he sees the value in there being someone who actually understands the struggles of working class people, helping those people. And like in the other two franchises, Peter helping out working class people leads to displays of solidarity by the end.
The other night you told that dude, if you're gonna shoot somebody, shoot me. It's pretty ballsy.
It's on our little spider friend. I heard a rumor. You know who he is?
If I knew who he was, he'd already be dead.
So, I think Spider-Man Homecoming had the most blatantly Marxist themes and plot of all the Spidey films so far. But it's a film franchise. Did Far From Home follow up on those themes? Not really, no. As a movie, I love it, but the lack of emphasis on class in this movie was a bit disappointing to me personally. There was an extended introduction that didn't make it into the film on the Blu-ray where we see Peter selling off his old Star Wars toys in order to afford the necklace he buys for MJ, and I really wish that in particular was kept in the film. Not just because it keeps Peter's economic status in mind, but also because it would actually help to illustrate how important this love confession to MJ is to him. That said, what Marxist themes are in the movie? Well, firstly, once again, Tony has a lot of disgruntled employees. Obviously, all these people being cool with mass murder is a huge red flag, but at the same time, this is yet another example of Tony's own treatment of the working class, creating problems that Peter, the only working class superhero in the MCU, is tasked with solving. There's also the fact that Tony is so inconceivably rich that he's been able to create a pair of glasses that have backdoors to every communications device on the planet, and drones that will assassinate anybody the user wants. He gave a teenage boy a wearable version of the Patriot Act.
That doesn't sound responsible.
And nobody could stop him. It would have been very easy to quickly and simply criticize the existence of this technology, period. At the end of the movie, after Mysterio dies, you simply have Peter state that Tony was wrong to make the glasses in the first place, that this power shouldn't belong to anybody, and you have Peter intentionally destroy the glasses. And it would work into his arc, too, of coming into his own and realizing he doesn't have to be Iron Man. And that also means he doesn't need to worry about the tactics that Tony Stark would have used. But without that moment, we're left with a moral void where we're not sure where this film stands on the morality of the glasses. But the silver lining here is that because they showed that Peter still has the glasses, they could conceivably spend a good chunk of the next film making it clear that they hold a power that absolutely nobody should have. Obviously, Peter can't actually keep them anyway. They solve too many problems way too easily. So maybe they actually plan to do something with this. But at the moment, what we're left with is a lot of questions that very much need to be answered if this series is going to be thematically coherent. So, in conclusion, who wins? You really want to see who's the winner and who's the loser. That's what Marxism's all about. So, who's the winner? In my view, it's Spider-Man Homecoming. But I can also see arguments for Far From Home really hampering the overall theming from a Marxist perspective of that version of Spider-Man. We'll have to see how the third one goes and takes it. Hopefully they deal with the fact that Peter Parker has murder glasses and shouldn't. Some people might also bring up that, these films are made by giant mega corporations, and what does that mean when it comes to Marxist theming? Does that context change the reading of this at all? I don't really have an answer to those concerns, honestly. Yeah, these movies are made for mass entertainment. They're made to turn a profit. That's what they exist for. There's really nothing we can do about that. But hey, if any massive superhero franchise owned by two soulless corporations can somehow accidentally radicalize people to the left, it's Spider-Man. Just like all spiders can.
That's right, folks, you heard it here first. Spider-Man is a socialist. He believes in ridiculous things like universal health care. This is America, damn it. You want to live? You better damn well pay for it. Oh, in related news, Spider-Man was seen downtown today fighting a lizard person, finally confirming what I've been telling everyone this whole damn time.